Welcome to Integrating Compost for Fertility and Soil Health. I work in vegetables, so compost is life for me. So that's one reason why I volunteered to introduce and help facilitate this session. So we'll be joining Patrick here as he shares his journey about starting a compost operation on his farm. Nothing more beautiful than a drone footage of a compost turning operation. So he'll share some details about his system and what it took to get started, as well as challenges. I'm sure there were minimal, no challenges whatsoever, mostly successes. So he'll share a bit about those, and then how this has changed the way he addresses soil fertility on his farm. So he operates a family farm in Wisconsin, over 900 acres. Over in the part of the state that I grew up in and dream about, and it's just beautiful out there. And he grows some specialty grains, in particular for lacrosse distilling too. Anybody? Yeah, big fan in the back there. And McHughs care about food and nutrition and apply their passion to everything that they do on the farm. And delighted to introduce Patrick to talk to us about compost, and I'll be his Vanna White today. So anything he asks me to do, I'll do. I'll show off his lovely samples here and do anything he wants. So yeah, without further ado, Patrick, please.
Great. Hello. Good morning. I'm Patrick McHugh. I'm 46 years old. I've been farming my whole life. I was blessed to become full-time on the farm at the age of 29. And in 2010 is when I became full-time, shortly before I lost my father to cancer. And so then a lot of the things that you jump into when you take over the farming operation gets you to start thinking about how we're going to run this operation, how we're going to handle things moving forward. It was about 2013 in that spring, and we're loading the grain drill. And as I'm trying to put seed and move around there, I'm using seed that have bluish in color. They were treated seeds back then. My kids wanted to help me, and so I decided that I had to tell them, I said, no, you can't touch that seed. And not long after that, I had a couple of cousins that had tumors and passed away. And so then that's when it finally hit me, and I said, it's time for me to transition to the materials that we have around us for what we're trying to produce ourselves and for everybody else. So that was the beginning path of the moment of when we finally decided to take a turn for producing products we feel is good for all of us. One of the main reasons I'm sure we're all here today. So along that journey, we tried to, be as independent as possible. And so of course I've tried, many different fertilizers over the years. And as we became certified organic our first year in 2018, we were, spending money on fertilizers and trying to improve rotation. And it can be difficult when you're just trying to focus on certain grains. And I didn't have enough animals at that time as well. And so instead of trying to spend a lot of money on production, we tried to find ways to look within. And so that's when we realized there is a lot of materials we're taking right now that we have around us to start building our own fertility program. So in April of 21, we bought a PT-130, a compost turner. It was a little over $50,000. We borrowed the money to do it. And it just got paid off a couple months ago, as a matter of fact. So that is a good feeling. But it's been a work in progress. So the things that we found out we had around us was the byproducts that I take from lacrosse distilling. I take their stillage. So the grains that we bring to them, we bring back. And I was selling to some of my local beef producers for feed, and which is excellent feed value that we've come to learn to find out. Well, then those two beef producers that I was working with were going out of business. So I had to find a way to try to utilize these materials. We found out that it is a wonderful green in the brown and green world of compost. So we're able to, put it on throughout the season. So a lot of my knowledge when I first started understanding compost was a lot of outfits would start their recipes initially and then try to turn it and try to have that finished throughout the season without adding some of the feedstocks, where us being able to get the stillage weekly, that we were able to keep it a little bit on the lower end of not being so hot right away. So we can keep it very active throughout the entire process of composting, which helps accelerate the process as well, and then helps get rid of some of the negative bacteria that we're looking for. So this was the first row that we had here. So this was in about June of 21, late June of 21. We had just got the compost turner. This was soybean stubble. That's one of the first pictures that we had, and started to figure it out on how to do it. And as we progressed and learned from other outfits, we tried to find ways to get materials that didn't cost us value. So I burn wood on our farm, and so I found out a lot of the tree guys are trying to get rid of firewood. And so I was able to take that, and then I said, well, I'll take your firewood for free, but then I want your wood chips. So then now a lot of these outfits bring us a fair amount of wood chips, which has been a great carbon source for us. It is one of the main ones early on. That's for the bigger field spread acres. So those we use will stack into a pile, and it'll be there for anywhere from a month to 4 months, depending on how much green we put into our compost, or our wood chips, excuse me. So our wood chips are a key component early on because it allows the early breakdown in the anaerobic form of some of our more volatile, damaging products like food wastes, carcasses, especially, bones. We take everything. We're able to take everything and put it in that wood chip pile. But we also keep any of the materials that get put into that pile are at least 5 to 6 foot off the ground. So we know we're making sure nothing is leaching through that wood chip pile. So that's been a blessing kind of in disguise. Of course, when we have lost some livestock, surprising the amount of roadkill that people have brought us and that we take care of. We call that division classy carcass. It's an inside joke, but it has worked out quite well. And we find out that there's a lot of people around that do help and do care as well. So that's the start of it. And so then when we first started to get going, you didn't really know what you're doing. But one thing we did know early on, fortunately from other resources, is keeping track of temperature and keeping track of moisture. And so those are a couple of key elements. I'll get back into a few slides later. But then as you go along, you can kind of see it and feel it, and it's a lot of the things that it just takes time and practice. You can try to have all the measurements you want, but sometimes just seeing it and feeling it and smelling it over a few years can greatly change how you approach the system to begin with. And so then this is one of our earliest videos of just trying to learn how to turn and trying to keep materials moving in an aerobic process. So then after this one happened to be a soybean pile, so that was sitting dormant until we were able to get the equipment here. So then this is one of our first couple of weeks of turning into it. So it sat dormant for a couple of weeks until we were able to get the equipment to get the ball rolling. And this is before we started adding clay to the system. That's a component we have been taught and believe that is pretty important on moving on later. So when we started doing this, I had some old bales that we didn't like and we didn't use, and so that was the first 2 rows. So then now we start to break these down and we try to figure out what can we do to have feedstocks that don't cost us so much money, and that we can try to produce our products within that we know we can handle safely and use. So you get a good view of our farm here. This is June of 21. Fortunately, I have good people around us that help us take these types of videos and allow us to try to help get our information out there. If it wasn't for good people around us, I wouldn't be here today. So that's one of the nice things that it is when you start to create products that people know you're doing a good thing is they definitely do come around, and you get more people around that are willing to help you. And then, like most farm operations, we don't pay people what they're worth. That's an old line from my grandpa and a guy named Whitey back in the 50s, and he said, well, Mr. Schaller, my mother's father, he said, well, I'd like a job. And then he said, okay. He said, yeah, I'd like a job. He says, what do you pay? And my grandpa said, well, I'll pay you what you're worth. And he said, well, I can't live on that. He forever worked on the farm for many, many, many decades. But so what happened is it brings us to people that help bring things, help me bring into perspective. I like to believe I'm one to listen to other people to try to help us on improving our own operation. And so then when we started thinking about it, so I jumped in kind of head first. I said, we just make it happen. So I got the turner. That was the first thing we had. We had a tractor already, and we had a skid loader. We were fortunate to have those. And so then after we started doing some of these things, and then after a year of doing it, I was able to start to put a pencil to these things. And of course, the amount of money and value that we were spending on other inputs was able to now correlate into our own fertility. So of course, now we understand, and of course, how we're reducing our input costs. Our costs have actually overall have gone down per acre on a per acre basis. The fact that the fertilizer that we can use ourselves and use for our own fields has allowed me to give a whole different perspective as well on the acres, on how we treat those acres and how we plant them. It's a good feeling when you can take all of your own waste products, things that we know we can turn back into fertilizer. And it's even better when you can take other people's. And it's difficult sometimes, and it can be frustrating, and it can be stinky on food wastes initially. But then, at the end of the day, we're realizing that, we can make a difference. And it's amazing at how many tons even just my family of 4 can make at the end of the year. It's a large amount. So that's why we're trying to continue to upcycle all of our own waste within our little circle to begin with. And we're just now starting to try to get into some revenue. Last year we sold about $10,000 worth of compost. And it takes time to get out there. And so, we're hoping our goal is to try to double our annual gross income off of that. The start has been good. We've had a fair amount of inquiries this year. So hopefully now we can, instead of just having a cost of production, hopefully it can help tip the scales and at least cover our cost. So then our fertility part of our fertility on the farm, a large part of it, can at least be paid for. That's our ultimate goal, and still doing the right things that we know we are doing. And after, using it many times, and we have a couple of farms that are, over 2 miles of a creek along us. A lot of land, of course, with some water runs as well, too. And, I've handled all of the manures in my life. You name it, animals, humans, I've dealt with it in the past. And so, the restrictions that come with those, are for a reason. There's a reason for that. Know that when you get the chance to use a material like this, it's pretty darn nice. When you plug the spreader, you can jump right in there and you can dig it out with your hands. And you don't have to worry about anything underneath your nails or having to really wash your hands if you need to. So that's one of the things on the environmental side is of course good for the water, as more and more studies are coming out with that. I am not a scientist, but I can tell you from facts that we use it, that it definitely it seems okay and safe around a lot of the water and ourself to use as well. So those simple things right there alone, I still have moments after we use it, and it just makes me smile, and it makes you happy to keep on going, to try to continue to do better. So we have one field in particular right out in front of my place. It's kind of by where we're composting, and that was the one we first started transitioning it into just strictly compost as the initial fertility. And these are things that I read before I started composting, and so it took some time to truly understand some of these moments. And so, as we were trying to, build compost and trying to, put a product out there that we felt these descriptions actually had true merit with, wasn't always true right away because I didn't always do it right. And so when especially not so much, I don't think on the pathogenic side, because we would test for that, which I'll get into, but especially weed seeds. That was one of the main ones early on, that if you didn't get your moisture and your temperature right early on, you found out that you could contaminate somebody's garden or other fields with a fair amount of weed seeds. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility when you're trying to disperse your product to other people. So I've had some difficult times of feeling bad, especially if you're sending somebody low quack grass or something. It's really not been the broadleaf so much that's been the issue. It's been the grasses. So if most of the things, because they're the most hardy in my opinion. So those are the things that we have learned. And fortunately, we haven't had any pathogen problems. We've been able to keep the heat up there enough that we've been able to kill, E. coli is one of the big ones. And, that we haven't had any issues with that. But weed seeds are definitely a big deal. And so we'll get into some of the things that I try to correct to help prevent that. So this was one of our test results here that we tried to figure out what kind of materials do we have, what kind of quality do we have. Of course, we want to try to base things off of fact of what we understand it as. And so, I was able to use this material for a couple of years before I was able to put some science behind it, because that's just kind of generally how I work. I like to try to have firsthand use with things, and then we'll follow up with some of the science. And so then we were able to, this is just one of the particular samples, just to give you an idea on some of the things that we've been trying to improve on. When I first looked at macronutrients and tried to figure out samples, the first thing that I looked at was like, oh man, there's not a lot of P and K in there, and my nitrogen, and so you think that you have to have a lot of these other stronger materials to begin with, and as I'm finding out, it's definitely more in the micros on that side, especially when you balance it with some good rotation, which has changed a lot for me. We'll get into that in a little bit. So here's just an idea of some of the samples of the products that we have produced. So what I did test before we even took that last nutrient sample was the grains. And so some of the grains that were coming out of it, we would test for feed value for animals, and then we would test it for nutrient value for just the grain itself as well. And so then when we were originally testing, it was based off of spirit production. So I'm trying to base it off of, initially, when you make spirit production, it's just all about starch. But what you find out when you start getting into a little more specialty products that try to retain some of that flavor, unlike a vodka can be smooth, but most of the things are taken back out of there. That's just mostly for alcohol content. When you start getting into bourbon and whiskeys, which is the grain on the left, that's the bourbon grain for us, then some of those micros and that really start to come into play. And so that's kind of what got us on the path in believing that some of this type of fertility actually correlates into a higher quality grain. So just try to give you some of the ideas on more of the feedstocks and our process. And we take spent grain, so that volume has increased. Before, when we first started, it was around 3,000 pounds a week. Now we take 30,000 pounds a week of spent grains. I bought a 1,500 gallon old milk tank that we supported to one of my fifth wheel trailers, and we pick up about 1,500 gallons 3 times a week. And so those are what the spent grains are, and which is nice because those are our grains. Our grains and Metal Arcs are one of the partner farmers that we can have that accountability and keep that connection and knowing completely what our feedstocks are. And so that has turned into a wonderful product. When we first started taking that, it was difficult. It's a little hard to handle. It separates very quickly. Can get very thick on the bottom because the grains separate from the liquids. But when you find out that you can start to put it and blend it with some of your dry feeds and blend it into with your compost, it turns out to be a fantastic product. So that's one of our greens, actually. And then our crop residues, so that comes in with some of our crop rotation. So especially when I'm doing soybeans, I windrow the soybeans. And some years I'll pick it up right away with a chopper. I have a pull behind chopper into a chopper box. And so that is one way that I try to control our weed seeds on our farming operation. And so that is one of our feedstocks then that we will turn into windrows. And of course the wood chips, and which I talked about earlier. And we're fortunate that we get a lot of those, but we don't charge for them. Some days maybe I should, but I don't. We're trying to do the right thing. And so, but it gives you control. So one advantage of not charging for somebody, if you have a problem, you're out of here. So it can be difficult. And, so it gives you that little more flexibility. So that's one reason, that's the main reason why I don't charge is if I have any problems, I can send them at any time, which hasn't been an issue, but. and then the clay. So one of the key issues, that's one of the feedstocks that, I don't have control over because it's coming out of the ground. And I just tested it for metals. So that's if you're going to use, even in some of your backyards or smaller production, I would recommend anywhere from 5 to 10% of your initial recipe of adding some clean clay. And, the earliest, best way to tell at least is just put it in a jar. Put it in you can smaller quart jar is plenty. Pint is fine, pint jar. Just take some clay, fill it half, 3/4 full, add a little water, shake it up. It's your soil test, your jar test. And so then you let that settle. Actually, in the first 30 seconds, you can see what particles sink down right away. And that will show you your grits. So that is your coarse soil. So that is your sand. So your sandy soils is what will fall right away. You basically want 99% clay. So one of the keys is getting very high quality clean clay. So very little sand. Sand is not something we're personally looking for because it has there is no charge to sand. Where clay is our blank here, negative ion, if I remember correctly. So clay is our negative ion. That's why we want clay, because so that will attract our positive ions, our volatiles, like our nitrogen, our sulfurs, our boron, some of those other ones. So that's the main reason that we were taught and continue to believe in that we try to add clay on early on. So this is just kind of a slide that I try to help show people with that when we're making finished compost, we start off with 4 different windrows. So, even if you're smaller scale, you can do it in smaller 4 different separate windrows or bins that you're using, because then after it starts to break down, which usually takes, I'll do anywhere from about 6 weeks, 8 weeks initially. So think of us having two windrows. Here's windrow 1, here's windrow 2. And it actually will be 4, but so then these are the first 2. So then these are combined, and each one of these gets a little bit of clay and gets our initial depending on what we're using, wood chips or plant-based materials, that gets started there, and then we add the clay on top. So the clay gets turned in. So then after that breaks down for about 6 weeks, then we'll combine them. Of course, we're taking readings every day, so you want to take your daily readings of moisture and temperature. I'll get more in the exact details of that shortly. But so then after we start to break that down, we'll combine those rows, and it's amazing at how active the rows will be when you combine them again. It's almost like you started over again. It'll get really hot, and it'll heat up in a hurry. Sometimes I've had to turn early in the morning or late at night when my piles get really hot. That's some of the things that, ambient temperature definitely plays a role on when you're trying to incorporate oxygen into the system, trying to cool it down and trying to relieve carbon dioxide. That's the big one that will kill your beneficial organisms. So, initially, we're trying to keep high fertility soil, but we're also trying to keep our beneficial. So that's the main purpose that I was first taught and trying to understand is how can we get, our factual nutrients than the ones that we don't understand as well, our bacterials, of course, and microorganisms. And so that's the reason for why we watch it so closely on temperature and moisture and CO2 readings. So then when you combine those, it allows that to react again and bring in, if one row isn't quite as good as another, it'll help each other out. And so then you can break those down. And so what happens is, that's why I ended up using, it pretty much ends up being 4 windrows turned into one by the time you're done, because it's amazing the amount that it breaks down, easily 50%, if not more, especially if you keep it very active. So this is why we try to get a little bit of an idea on some of the things that we're doing. So then when you finally, getting towards the finished product of these, then of course, then we have these 2 rows that we added together, then we have the other 2 rows that are added together, and eventually those 2 get combined into one big windrow. That's some of the initial process. And when you start that process, then we're able to start it over again, but then you take the product from this and you use about 2% of this finished product goes on your new windrows. So that's one of the keys to accelerate the breakdown process and to improve your biological activity. That's the key. One of the the macros and the micros won't change quite so much, but the biologicals will change a lot when you're starting to able to bring it back down into your existing system. That's the one that'll help you the most. Just trying to give you an idea on some of the equipment. We had a tank before, which helped. We run some water through there, but fortunately to the stillage and the products that we can get in town, that we have to use very little water that comes out of the well, which we try hard not to. So it just gives you an idea on the initial purchase. We had the tractor to begin with and had the tank. So for us to get the ball rolling was a nice piece of the puzzle. And then as we progressed, we were able to get a payloader. It's kind of hard to see there now, but it's a taller one. I found a good used one. That's not paid off till next year. I still got 10 grand on that. But, it's not too bad. I bought it when interest wasn't terrible, still only 5%. But, it's been pivotal. I wore out the skid loader's tracks trying to combine rows and compost. And so the payloader is a big one. That's when you start to deal with a little bit of volume. Those machines can move large amounts with much less wear on your equipment. But the downfall with those things is they're heavy, they're big. If you're going to take a section of your field you don't plan on farming for some time, that's what that's going to do to it. So we're trying to set up our areas that are more conducive to heavy equipment. So with the payloader, then we were able to find a used screener. This one is called an Orbit screener. A farmer out of Iowa made it. I thought it was a fantastic idea. Personally, something mobile. You can hook it up to your pickup. We found that a couple years ago in central Michigan, and we paid $65,000 for that machine. They're about 120 now, 125, but they're very flexible, and it was something that we have used a lot, and it's amazing how much you can get out of a smaller machine. So the nice thing with this type of screener is the disc itself. It looks like the satellite. That is the screen itself. So we have 2 screens. We have a 1-inch screen, and we have a half-inch screen. And usually we'll use the 1-inch screen on wood chips for when we're doing more of the bigger field acres for a little more volume, and then when we're doing like the materials in the bags over there, the food grade compost, or we call it premium market garden compost, then we'll use the half-inch screen, which by the time you're done, it actually screens out very little. If you have good control of your feedstocks, you don't have to do much screening. It works out pretty nice. So, and of course, a lot of people have skid loaders, but it's pivotal as well too for helping to get rid of some of the smaller discards, and just for loading ourselves. I use that a lot for the gardens and the smaller areas. But it's definitely pivotal on on keeping some of the windrows clean. And now this was year 2 when we are starting to get a little more of a system. I'm finally understanding drainage a little better. One of the things that is key is it can't be flat. You have to have some slope. Any puddles or anything like that, you can even see a little water there. We've actually moved from that side, from that, sorry for not a very good video, but it gives you an idea of what we're doing. A view from the cab. And so back to your yard layout is probably one of the most crucial ones, is that it has to be sloped. Ideally, if your row is anywhere from, depending up to you, 50 feet, ours are about 400 feet long, is what we shoot for. And then we slope them in the middle. So it's kind of like a V, or slope T down, like a tent, T down. And that allows the water to run off in both directions from the center of the row. That has given us the best luck and what we've learned from other ones. So any puddling or ponding at all next to the windrow, it'll soak it right up and make that whole area extremely saturated and turn it into anaerobic, and you can just smell it. You'll be able to tell right away on one of those things. And so then as we tried to make rows, we found out that, the covers are nice. So this is more of like a fleece. So this can breathe, but it helps shed the water. That changed a lot. As we progress, that's one of the things we're going to move on more forward, is covering all of the rows. It would be ideal, of course, and it's an expense as well too. But that's allows it to retain the moisture better. It also allows to keep the water off of the windrows. And it's kind of funny, that's why we picked this one, because the animals, they like to perch. And it's not just the dogs, it's the wildlife, it's the coyotes, it's the coons, it's the sandhill cranes, all of them. They all just hang out on them windrows. It's pretty darn entertaining. That's for sure. So that's why we've tried to get more finances to help with covers. The hard part with that is handling the covers, because they're big, they're long, they can be heavy. Right now we do it by hand. We haven't invested in the equipment to roll that up or down. So 2 of us can do it. One of you can if you're in really good shape and feeling good and frisky that day. It's a challenge. You'll tear a nail, pretty bad, but it usually is worth it. Once you kind of get a system down, 2 of you can take that pile, that cover off within 10 minutes and put it right back on within 10 minutes. And you'll find out too, like when your moisture is correct and it's not too wet, that's the biggest key, is if it's not too wet, that the covers will move easily. So just some of the bullet points of what we're trying to achieve for temperatures. When it hits between 135 and 150, we're out there turning. That's usually our telltale sign. We have a probe. This is the probe that we have. We usually put that about a foot and a half or so, maybe 2 foot below the center peak of the pile, to try to find, that's where the most heat is. So with this one, we're a little hot. I'm probably a good 8 hours too late from turning this row. I don't like to see too much more than 170. You start getting above 160, 170, you're starting to kill the things we're trying to keep. So then our moisture, I'm okay with a little drier sometimes. You're better off with a little drier than too wet, because it just can't breathe. And so it has to be able to breathe to break down aerobically. And what we'll do is, early on, when the materials are a little more coarse like this, you can actually use your bale moisture. Drawing a blank there, where you can test your bale moisture probe. That will tell you early on what some of your moisture is, but then once it starts to break down, then we'll put it in the microwave. And that will, you can weigh it, you can weigh your 100 grams out of the material, put it in the microwave, usually around 3 minutes, depending how wet it is, and then you can weigh it again, and then that will give you your percentage of moisture. And then they have CO2 gauges out there. They're starting to come out with newer ones. That's one of the things we're working on, is eventually we'll have a probe that will sit in the windrow, and they can read CO2 and temperature and moisture remotely. But that's the key. So one of trying to read CO2, which we don't have a monitor yet. We just go off of moisture and temperature. I should have a CO2 monitor, but what they want you to check is what they say is after you turn, you stop and you check the amount right after you've turned that row. And that's where you can decide on if you were going too fast or too slow when it was being turned. So then this is just some of our logs. Of course, our inspectors like to see this. I like to see this. And these are the things that we try to just, every time we're out there, that we try to keep track of. And, having a log is what's going to help your success of making quality materials at the end of the day. Just a little bit of us early on, and getting some of our stillage. This was a few years ago, one of the first years before I was able to anchor the tank down. I had to use some straps, and just out of necessity. What can we have? What can we try to do that we have equipment already with, and try to make it useful? And so that's kind of how things started to evolve. Early on, we used to use some barrels, and then we went to IBCs, or the cage tanks. And it was very difficult to get out of those materials, and of course they're plastic as well. So there's a lot of old milk tanks out there, fortunately and unfortunately. And so that's one that we were able to find. We found that for $3,000, that 1,500-gallon tank. So that was our investment. It's the tank we still use today. So it's pretty pivotal to the operation. Early on, when you start to get the product put out there, you got to do things the hard way once in a while. And sometimes one person would be driving and along the edge of the row, and then one of us would be out there spreading the materials. As we progressed and get better, ideally you mix that in as you're turning. And with your materials, it can be difficult to spray out there. So some of the thicker stuff we'll do out there like this. We'll spray it on top and then turn it in. If you're set up properly, you can inject it through your turner. The turners have spray nozzles on them that allows that to be injected as you're turning. That's the ideal way to do it, but whatever it takes sometimes to get it incorporated. So just some of the things that we've tried to do with our finished products. After this was one of the first rows that we finished, and I had some rye, and I wanted to see how it worked. Of course, drilling rye, which is the best way to do it, and getting your seed to soil contact. But I wanted to see what it would be like to spread it out there. And so I had a gravity box that had a little over 150 bushel in it, and I drove that up and down on this row, and put the rye on there, and then we turned it in. We turned it in twice. We made it down and back with the turner. And then we spread that out, and that got spread out on a little over 80 acres total. We did 4 ton to the acre with that material there. And it was one of the best rye stands I've ever had. I was actually surprised. I was very impressed at how good it was for just spreading it on the ground. There was zero incorporation, and it was done around the first week of October. And I haven't had that much of luck spreading rye on top of the ground, but I believe that adding it with, a material like compost greatly helped that cover crop success. So, we try to find ways to be inventive, and we know other people out there have talked about, making products that can turn into liquid. And so that's where we hope that some of the biological side of it can try to be extracted. And so what we've done is we will take our wood ash. I have a couple outdoor boilers, and I'm very picky about what that is. It's just clean firewood that goes in my boiler. So I take that, I screen that very fine. I add that into our liquids. I take a pound of our compost per 10 gallons of water is what I have used. And then we also we screen the solids out of the distillery's stillage. So then the liquids that's coming from the distillery, which is very clean because that's all RO water. And then we use that for the liquid. So then there's some nutrients in that as well, because it's kind of a yellowish. So you can strain some of the the stillage materials, and you're getting some nutrient value out of that. And then we'll put it into a tank, and then we aerate it. And I found out a couple of the things that when you aerate it, that initially when you make the recipe, you don't smell it at all. But then after about 12 hours of bubbling it, you can actually smell it. It actually kind of will smell like manure a little bit. And then it also will balance your pH. I found out bubbling water will change the pH on your water. So, where the distillery's water is around that 4.5 coming off of the still, and that it gets it up closer to that 7.5, 8 range after it's been bubbled. So then this is just some of the things that we've used as a liquid product on our farm for our in-furrow or spraying on top of the plant. So it's one of the things we try to use for our, preventative plant health products. And I just used a 2-inch banjo quick coupler valve that we reduced down to an air chuck. So pretty straightforward, nothing fancy, pretty low cost, and if just take some work and effort, and there's some merit to it. There's a little bit of what we do. Hopefully open to any questions, of course, here as well. And, hopefully that helped out with some inputs for you guys.
I have a question. Oh, is this on? Hello. Are your row covers held down by anything? I didn't see any sandbags or anything. Do they blow away?
We haven't had too much issues where we are because we have a pretty strong fence line there that blocks the wind. But yes, we will use logs of firewood is what I've used. I know other people have added chains to them. They've cut little holes on the end. We'll add that or some cables. We just have a lot of firewood, and that's what we use. So that's worked for us.
On your mixture that you're using feedstocks, you're also using inoculants. Is that correct?
I am not.
Okay, because I see in the was it ACS?
Excuse me. That was an inoculant off of a Midwest Biosystem. So that was one of their slides. So our inoculates have been self-produced by bringing it back after a few years. So that's the inoculant we use is then our finished material. So then after a year or two of that has been our own inoculant used in. So.
Okay, because I was wondering if you were using that to speed up the process or control moisture for the finished product, or what your reason behind using an inoculant was. Since you're using so many feedstocks with food waste and everything, you wouldn't have a problem getting that heat. So that was just confusing to me that you use an inoculant.
Sorry about that. That was just a generic slide that I used. Should have probably done better at that. But as it's progressed, we've been able to use our finished products. What's helped, and it took a couple years for us to really get back to getting our own inoculants working on that. And so. But that's one of the things I think has helped is that we can continually to feed the stillage into our windrows, and so it's amazing how active that can keep it. And of course, there's a fair amount of ground up grain in there as well too. So and grain is definitely a green. And as we go out as well too, so that's one of the things in the earlier slide of when I was showing the chopper. We will. Throughout the season, depending on cuts of hay, some we don't use for animals, some we'll use for the compost. We will add that to the windrow as well, especially wood chips, because they're the highest in carbon. So we'll be able to take that direct cut of green grasses and hay, and then we'll run the chopper box along the edge of that row and put it on the top. Usually make it down and back. It works out pretty good by the time the box gets empty, and then we'll turn that in. That's another way of keeping it activated. For fairly low cost.
Thank you for your presentation. I have kind of a two-part question that kind of relates into each other. Is there an organic certification process that you need to do? I know like with a lot of litters, it doesn't have to be organic, so I don't know if those same rules apply for compost. Reason being, in Indiana, we have an overpopulation of horse manure and an under area of places to get rid of that. heavy population densities. And, I've seen folks in our area in the past that have utilized horse manure as a part of their compost, but obviously that won't be organic. So.
Got it. Well, we have used manure, and we have used horse manure. And when it comes to our certification process, I have to divulge that information to our certifier. So then our certifier then is informed of the person and the name and the address I give them of where I get our horse manure as well too. And so that we use into our wood chips. They want to know our feedstocks when it comes to certifying. It's not been an issue, and they want to see the log. That's the key. So of keeping a good log, and I have not had any issues with certification on that, and especially on the food grade materials, of course, because that's not manure. That's just all plant based on those. But when it comes to the field acres, yeah, there was a little more scrutiny under the food waste and the manure side of it. So we have used cattle manure, we've used horse, we've used pig. I try to stay away from chicken manure because it's so high in sodium. So when it comes to some of your manures and some of your feedstocks, specifically manure, you kind of want to know how much sodium is in it. Sodium can be a detriment on making at least biologically active soil.
Can you speak a little bit to the clay, where you source it, how much it costs, how far you have to go to get it, how someone would source that in their community?
It's not what you know, it's who you know. And so, I've done some development in my time to help pay for some of our farm and, our farming debt. And I'm still in debt, but we're working on that. And along with that came with making some connections with developers. And so that's a good people to know that are always digging basements. And so that's really where it came from. So find out the guys that are building houses and find out where your areas that has a better source of clay. And I mean, you can just tell, you can just see it. You can see the color of it. Just the color of that nice clay. Blue clay works okay too, as long as it's clay. Of course, we're more of the brownish clay around the La Crosse area. But and we ended up buying a bunch of it, more than we needed when we first got going. So we got a good deal. We got it for $50 a load delivered to us. And I bought 100 loads. And so far we have used about half of that in the last 3 years. So his question is if we're screening the clay. We most certainly are. Yes. So I'm trying to make the clay material as fine as possible. I'm trying to dry it down. I'm trying to get it to particle size, so then it can help adhere to every piece of carbon, every piece of material in the windrow itself. Yes, clay distribution is very important. Yes. I was just going to give a few pointers then as well for when it comes to what I've tried to do for application methods. We have a poultry spreader, is what we bought a few years back when we were trying to change from alternative sources from back to synthetics. I used to apply a fair amount of poultry manure, which to me was a little bit hot, and there were still some weed seeds in that as well. And so we were able to keep that spreader, and that's what we'll spread on the top when it comes into the finished compost form. Anywhere from, so far I've done 2 ton to the acre, I've done all the way up to 8 ton to the acre. Finding out that's, we'll see what kind of result it really has. And that's more for the vegetable production. That's where I really push the limits, is where my sweet corn goes, our direct to fresh market, farmers market sweet corn. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm trying to spread it on fields that are growing in green. That's one of the things I've probably seen the best results from, because I'm trying to run an organic operation that doesn't do tillage. And it's very challenging at times, but I found out that I have the best retention with things already out there growing, and you can see it very quickly on the response of the plants. And I firmly believe it has greatly improved our reduction of weeds in our operation. So when I windrow our soybeans, I'll come in this next year. I actually left the windrow this year, and I'll let it sit there, and I'll let it sit in the spring, so any weed seeds that are left over will hopefully germinate early on. And then I will come through and pick that up with a chopper, and then I will no-till corn right into that. I picked it up a couple years ago. I picked up the windrow immediately, but then came in and no-tilled corn right into that and had a fair amount of success. I was actually surprised at how well the corn did that year. It was a little over 100 bushel the acre, but I just planted it. That was it. Well, I spread compost out there, and then I just planted it. And I had very few weeds. I've actually really don't have much of a ragweed issue anymore. I've been pretty surprised by that. So, but from when I tried to, transition our acres, because not all of our acres have been able to be spread yet. So I'm trying to get into the hay, more alfalfa, a little more clovers. I don't really plant grasses anymore because they'll grow naturally. That's one of the things, in my opinion, is a lot of grasses they're native, they're there, they'll come out. I'm especially seeing that now that we have some more animals incorporated. But it definitely has greatly improved the quality of our grains. And that's why we tried to bring some materials here today to try to show you some of our finished products, some of our finished grains, some of our milled grains for feed, and then one of the red corns that is milled just for corn flour, corn grits. And the volume is not like it once used to be when you were a conventional farmer, but I've never had such quality. I've been fortunate to have no pest issues. I've been very fortunate to have no disease issues, and it's enough worth doing. And it feels good. The grain looks good, and so when I clean the grain, there's just not a lot coming off of it. So I believe in it, and I think it's been a good start. So that's a couple of the things that we're doing on our operation and trying to incorporate. Yep, well, I didn't think I brought enough for everybody, but one per family maybe, so you guys are welcome to take some home with you. That's just try to show you what we're doing and what our finished products are. Yep, all those bags are for anybody to take. And of course, you're welcome to look at the jars and open them accordingly as well, too. And hopefully we can all get a little better at cleaning up after ourselves. Thanks so much, Patrick. Thanks, everybody.